Ladies and gentlemen, Rex Bear with Leak Project. I'd like to thank you very much for joining us this edition. I have a real treat for you tonight, folks. We have the founder and president of Oath Keepers with us, Stewart Rhodes. Now, he was born in Fresno, California, and comes from a family of hardworking migrant farm workers of Mexican and Apache Indian descent on his mother's side, and hardworking Midwest farmers, horsemen, and GM auto workers on his father's side. Now, both sides of his family have a long tradition of military service. During World War II, his grandfather on his mother's side was a B-17 ball turret belly gunner, and his grandfather on his father's side of the family served as an Army infantryman in the Battle of the Bulge. Nearly all of his uncles on both sides of the family served in the Army or Marine Corps during World War II, Korea, and Vietnam. His father also served as a Marine. Now, following the tradition, Stewart joined the Army straight out of high school at the age of 18, attending basic, AIT, and jump school at Fort Benning, Georgia, and then serving as a paratrooper, airborne infantry, stationed first at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, and then at Fort Lewis, Washington, where he served in a long-range airborne scout company for the 9th Infantry Division until disabled in a rough-terrain parachuting accident during a night jump. After the Army, Stewart graduated from the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, summa cum laude, where his honor thesis focused on the political theory of James Madison. While attending UNLV, Stewart taught rape prevention and street crime survival as a volunteer instructor for the UNLV Jean Nidetick Women's Center. Probably said that wrong. He also worked as a professional sculptor and as a Nevada State certified concealed carry firearms instructor. After college, he worked on the Representative Ron Paul's staff. Now, Stewart also graduated from Yale Law School. How ironic is that, folks? Back in 2004, where his paper solving the puzzle of enemy combatant status won Yale's Judge William E. Miller's Prize for Best Paper on the Bill of Rights. He assisted teaching U.S. military history at Yale's History Department, was a Yale Research Scholar, and is now writing a book on the dangers of applying the laws of war to the American people. With partial support from a modest but gracious grant from Yale Law School, after law school he clerked for the Arizona Supreme Court and then served as a small-town Montana criminal defense lawyer. He has served in a pro bono capacity on several gun rights cases before federal courts of appeal and the United States Supreme Court while practicing law in Montana. He's also served as a volunteer firefighter. So talk about a resume, folks. Now, here's what I find fascinating. If you look up Oath Keepers, like if you go to a specific search engine, type in Oath Keepers, you'll see Wikipedia will typically pop up shortly after oathkeepers.org. And if you click on what Wikipedia says, they really spin this organization, in my opinion. Now, let me just read to you what Wikipedia says. Oath Keepers is an American radical organization associated with the anti-government patriot movement. So if you're a patriot, then now you're anti-government. Thank you for spinning that on people. I really appreciate that. It encourages members, some of whom are current and former U.S. military and law enforcement officers, not to obey orders which they believe would violate the United States Constitution. The group is best known for its controversial presence in Ferguson, Missouri during protests and unrest in the city during which its members were armed with semi-automatic rifles. Oh no, head for the hills! And were described as a far-right militia group by the media. So that's pretty much all I'm going to read from Wikipedia here. But you can clearly tell whoever wrote that has a specific agenda. Is there something wrong with defending the Constitution from enemies, foreign and domestic? What's your opinion, ladies and gentlemen? Is there something wrong with that? Anyway, very fascinating stuff. I hope you enjoy the presentation. Make sure to go to leakproject.com if you want access to exclusive content. Subscribe to youtube.com/clandestine time lord. Also go check out our new YouTube channel, William Wallace. That's linked on our My Friends section on the YouTube homepage. Have a fantastic day, everybody, and be the change you want to see. This is Rex Bear. We'll talk to you soon. Well, Stewart, it's great to have you on the show here with us at the Leak Project. I know you're very busy. You got a lot going on. You get hundreds of invitations a week, so just very honored to speak with you. And how the heck are you?
Doing fine. Thank you for having me on. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. It's just great to finally speak with, I mean, you actually founded the Oath Keepers, and I've been trying to get in contact with you for quite some time. This is great. Now, if you would, for our audience, Stewart, tell us a little bit about yourself and why you decided to start the Oath Keepers.
I served as a paratrooper in the Army until I was disabled in a parachuting accident. Then after that, I attended college at UNLV. I used to be a firearms instructor and a self-defense instructor, and I also then worked for Ron Paul in his DC office before I went to law school. I went to Yale Law School and graduated from Yale in 2004. After that, I moved to Montana and been here since 2005. And I worked also served as a volunteer firefighter here in Montana. That's my background. And I started Oath Keepers because I was part of the Ron Paul campaign in 2008. And then when I realized that Ron Paul was not going to win the Republican nomination, I knew we were in trouble. I considered John McCain an oath-breaking traitor, and I also considered, of course, Barack Obama and Hillary to be oath breakers too. Didn't really know back then who was going to be, when I made the decision, who was going to be the president, who was going to be the nominee for the Democrats. So I just realized that what we need to do is focus on the American warrior class. And I define that as the military, current serving and retired, us veterans as well, the police, the first responders like firefighters, EMTs, search and rescue, and also the gun owners in this country. I consider that the warrior class of this nation. And the reason to focus on them is that if we're running out of time, we're going to have oath breakers, and we do, unfortunately, in both parties in power, entrenched in power. The only way to really counter their desire to destroy the Constitution, what's left of it, the only way to counter that is to focus on the guys with the guns. And that's both the guys that are current serving and retired. So that's our focus, is trying to unite the American warrior class and get them to understand the Constitution and make some decisions ahead of time about what they will and will not do. And of course, our responsibility as veterans goes beyond just saying we're not going to do things. We issued, the first thing out of the gate was he issued a declaration of 10 orders that a current serving oath keeper would not obey. And all they are is a mirror, basically, of the Bill of Rights, but adding in our experiences in the 20th century, the concentration camps, the internment of Japanese Americans, the application of laws of war to American citizens. We've seen this since 2001 in particular, right? So all of this stuff is why we said in our declaration of 10 orders we will not obey. And it's kind of weird. It's like the left never acknowledges that any of those things have ever happened in history or any of them are legitimate concerns. They always try to paint us as being conspiracy theorists, and yet I can point to almost every one of those planks and show where it's happened in history. So out of the gate, the goal was to focus on the current serving, but also the responsibility of the veterans has been there from the very beginning. And we're really focused on that now with our CPT project, which stands for Community Preparedness Teams. We're encouraging our veterans to go out and take a lead in their communities and get their communities ready for what's coming, and also work to revitalize that institution that the founders considered necessary for the security of a free state, and that's the militia. So we can talk about that as well.
Absolutely. And one thing that I wanted to bring up is I remember in 2009 when the media pushed the MIAC strategic report, the modern militia movement, and combined with just the way that the mainstream media spins somebody that's a part of a militia group, it seems as if in the movies, the TV shows, we all know that Hollywood's in bed with the Department of Defense, essentially. And the way that they project somebody that isn't a part of the establishment, they make them look like a back hills country boy that has an IQ of maybe about 85, that has some buck teeth and really a tough time understanding anything outside of, hey, it's time to, we better take our guns away. They just make them look like idiots.
Well, they'll go find that guy. That's what they always do, is they go find that guy and put him up. And here, let's not fool ourselves. I was around in the 90s, and when the first wave of the militia movement came up, and I can tell you that a lot of times they were their own worst enemies, PR-wise, because you had people who were never prior service, never even served in the military, had zero training, parading around, calling themselves general and colonel and crap like that. And I can tell you, as a veteran, all it did is piss me off. It pissed off a lot of the other veterans. And we didn't want to take part in a group run by a clown like that, some complete Walter Mitty wannabe. So that's kind of the problem, is that the militia movement in this country, in many ways, has cut its own throat and marginalized itself by the lack of standards and the kind of character that tends to want to rise to leadership. These are guys that, like I said, never served. And not that a guy who never served doesn't have a right to take part in his community. He certainly does. But don't parade around in colonel wings unless you've got a battalion underneath you. Or, if you're a captain, you should have at least a company-size element. If it's just you and a dozen buddies, you're a friggin' squad leader. That's all you are. You don't deserve the title captain. It's just retarded. So I think the militia movement has a lot of problems that just come out of that lack of discipline. And also, frankly, a real militia would be everybody in the community. It's under the founders' ideal and their own actual practice. It was every able-bodied man in the community. So a good example is right up in lead up to Bunker Hill, or lead up to Lexington Concord. Actually, there's a really good book out called Bunker Hill about this lead up to the war, and in this book it describes how during the powder alarms that led to Lexington Concord, they were going back and forth. You know, the colonists were going and grabbing powder out of the militia storage that they thought belonged to the militia, and of course the Crown thought it belonged to them, and so General Gage sent out his men to go seize the powder. So they're going back and forth like this, and there's a rumor at one time, about a month before Lexington Concord, that 4 militiamen had been killed by the Redcoats, and everybody turned out. About 15,000 militia turned out and flooded towards Boston under this rumor. Well, one guy was sitting in a tavern in a town when the alarm came up. He was a traveler, and he said that within 15 minutes, the hotel he was staying at, the lodge, was full of the men of the town. And then about 15 minutes later, they were all gone. The town was empty. It was him and the old shopkeeper, and that was the old lodge keeper, and that was it. The entire town was gone. They were gone, going towards Boston. That's an example of a real militia. It was every able-bodied man in the community, period. Most militia, so-called militias nowadays, it's Bubba and his dozen buddies, or they throw up some website. They claim to be the militia for the entire state, even though it's just, some guy in his underwear in his basement or in his house, and him and his friends. Well-intentioned, but unless you have everybody in your community on board, it's not really a militia. It's nothing. Okay, it's just paper tiger, and we've seen that over and over again in this country, unfortunately. So to me, unless it's every able-bodied person in the community, I don't think it deserves the title. It just doesn't deserve it. What you are at best is a select militia or a volunteer company or even a volunteer squad. Like I said, most of them are never beyond a squad size element. So I think the guys that are in the militia movement need to take a reality check about what they really are, and they're nowhere near the goal. They need to open themselves up to the community and work with the community and get as many folks on board as possible, so that they do actually represent at least all the able-bodied patriots in the community. So
Absolutely.
that's why in our efforts, we don't use the title militia for anything we do, because we don't think, like I said, we don't think it deserves it. Another issue that is a reality is that with a sheriff, for example, you have an elected sheriff who is elected by the people of the community. He's under the authority of the electorate, right? He's an elected officer. A sheriff has much more legitimacy in the eyes of the public out there than any group that just self-starts up and calls themselves the militia. In historic reality in the towns of Massachusetts, you had the men pick their own officers. A guy who was a captain was the captain because all the men had picked him, and once again, it was all the men of the town. And so, unless you have that broad participation and that broad authority in your town, you're not going to be seen as legitimate by your community. So, I think the best way to go is to apply that label very selectively, only if you have some kind of official sanction, such as the town council establishing the militia and recognizing it, it's under their authority, and then they can let the guys pick their own leadership. I think that's fine. But short of that kind of town sanction, I don't think it should be called a militia. So I know there's folks that'll disagree with that. And when crap happens, you got to just do what you can with what you have. But I think between now and where our goal is to have a real militia system again, and that would be under state statute, well organized, well trained and equipped, under the authority of the governor, and then with the full backing of the state legislature. That's the ideal. Is that going to happen? I don't think so. Okay, I don't think that's going to happen before the crap hits the fan. And this is where I might differ with Dr. Edwin Vieira, who really wants to see it done by state statute. I don't think that's ever going to happen realistically. So I think we have to just do the best we can. That's why I would go back to the county level or the town level. If I could get I live here in Eureka, Montana, if I can get my local town council to recognize the veterans and the gun owners who are training in this community, to recognize them as the militia for the town, I'll accept that. And I'll call that a militia. But if I don't have that kind of recognition from the town leadership, I'm not going to call it a militia, just because of the fact that I don't have that political cover anymore. And until I do, I think the word has been so demonized by the left, and like I said earlier, so unfortunately also demonized by the bad behavior of folks that use the title. I think that we have to just not use it until we have that sanction. So until then, call it a civil defense team, call it a volunteer town security team, call it whatever you want to call it, neighborhood watches, town watches. You can call them all kinds of things, but I wouldn't apply the word militia unless you have a sanction from the town.
Absolutely. And another thing that term reminds me of is I recently watched this reality series, or not the series, but just one episode, and I could even take the whole episode. I'll turn on the TV on occasion just to see what Hollywood media is doing to program the masses. It's kind of like a way for me to get their overall map of where they're trying to take and condition people. So I'm watching these preppers, these militia people, and most of them look like they weigh anywhere from 300 to 400 pounds. And the way that they, and they're like, okay, well, we're going to teach these guys how to sleep in this, miniature bare bones tent and how to do this tarp thing. And the way that they project these guys is they're really pushing anybody that's outside of the system to look at, like I said earlier, just somebody that is out of shape, doesn't know what they're doing, total hillbilly or redneck. And they're pretty good at spinning that subconsciously, whether somebody realizes it or not. Now, you definitely realize it. Many of our listeners of the Leak Project see it, but overall, I would say most people don't pick up on that. I mean, look at a commercial today. Most commercials today have a sissified man married to like this butch woman that tells him what to do. It's crazy. Am I wrong?
No. I mean, look, there is a definite reality. I mean, look at Duck Dynasty. These are just really average guys in rural America, and yet they're portrayed as being some kind of Neanderthal throwback. And I can tell you from living out here in rural Montana, I mean, everybody around where I live, everybody has wood heat. Everybody's on a well. Everybody hunts. Everyone has chickens. Everyone has goats and sheep. Most of them have horses. You know what I mean? This is rural America. And in rural America, these are things that are not exotic to us at all. Going out and chopping wood in the middle of the winter, but to an East Coast metrosexual from New York City, chopping wood and heating it in a wood burning stove to heat your house is some kind of weird thing out of, Little House on the Prairie for them. And so that's part of it, is that in their mind, that is exotic and outlandish, and for us, it's just a way of life. But when they go, and do these shows, they'll pick the guy who is a little bit unbalanced or is like focused on the apocalypse and that's all he thinks about. He doesn't have a normal life. That's who they pick. And they pick the guy who comes across as kind of nuts, and that's unfortunate. So that's the other side of it too. They'll take a guy who really isn't just just an average Joe, and they'll edit it to make him look nutty, or they'll find a guy who kind of is nutty. And unfortunately, there's plenty of them in the prepper movement. There are folks that
they're everywhere.
yeah, well, I've seen it. I've been a prepper for a long time. It's like I've been involved in the Patriot movement for a long time. We've been storing food for decades. My family has. My wife was Mormon, so she grew up doing it. So to us, it's no big deal. But there are folks who are drawn. Like I knew a guy, for example, in Las Vegas, who had lived in a trailer, and he was a customer who used to come into our gun shop I used to manage, and that's how I got to know this guy. But he lived in a trailer where he had all kinds of prepper gear. I mean, the entire thing was stuffed with it. He owned like 30 guns. Me and another buddy of mine would go shooting with him, and we could outshoot this guy with any of his guns because he never practiced with them enough. He just liked to store the gear. And it turned out he had diabetes. And so, he was going to die he had really bad diabetes. He was going to die without insulin shots. And so I was like, why is he even bothering he should be storing insulin, not survival gear. He doesn't need more guns. He needs to figure out a way to make insulin or store it or whatever, because otherwise he's a dead duck within a few months, So it was just an example of like a person who seizes on it as kind of like a lifestyle or obsession. And he didn't even train. We could always shoot circles around this guy with his own guns. It was kind of embarrassing because he didn't focus on training. And that's one thing, to give some tough love to the prepper movement. You see a lot of people that are so focused on gear. They don't focus on skills, on knowledge, on actual, kind of like they focus on the hardware, not the software. You know what I mean? They're focused on all the big stack of stuff, and they don't have any idea how to use it.
Right.
So I think that's a real serious problem in the prepper movement and in the broader liberty movement too. Same kind of problem.
It reminds me of, I talked to John Michael Greer on the Leak Project a while back, and he said, instead of going out and accumulating all this stuff, if, things really do hit the fan, which is good to have, why don't you go out there and learn how to do something? If you can make good beer, if things hit the fan and you meet a warlord, if you offer them a nice ale, maybe they'll let you go. He's kind of joking around, but it's good to have some type of knowledge as far as how to do stuff, like you said. Otherwise, all this stuff in the world isn't going to help you out. When that runs out, then how are you going to continue to get more stuff and more resources? So that's definitely important. And I see so much going on right now with the elections, with gun confiscation, especially after that Pulse nightclub shooting in Orlando. The very next day that happened, I said, you know what? They're going to use this as a precursor to go after specific rifles and weapons. And sure enough, while some people are looking at lens flares in the skies, they go past bills and regulations where, okay, no more AR-15s. You can't get semi-automatic weapons in a lot of states now.
Right. And of course, we knew that was going to happen, right? It happened after Sandy Hook. It happens after every one of these shootings. And this is one more reason why Americans need to look at the right to bear arms as a public obligation, not just your private right. And this is also another bone I have to pick with a lot of gun rights activists is they're so focused on basically they accept the left's limiting view of the Second Amendment, and they'll say, well, only really legitimate purpose for carrying guns is to protect ourselves against crime. And I even saw a recent article in a real slick gun magazine, full of all kinds of tattooed tough guys with AR-15s. But this magazine that's, I guess, aimed at the AR-15 crowd had an article by a lawyer saying that if you try to interject yourself into an active shooter situation, then you're playing Batman, and you should just leave it to the police. That's what we have police for. And he's missing the friggin' point of a militia. A militia is every able-bodied person, and it's our public duty to interject and stop the killing. In the founders' day, there was no professional police. It was you and your neighbors as the sheriff's posse, and you and your neighbors as the militia that defended your community. And that's really all that ever works anyway. You're never going to have a cop sitting right there. Like an old saying goes, I carry a gun because a cop's too heavy. So, and of course, gun rights people will be like, yeah, that's why I carry a gun to defend myself. But that's for me and my family. And if I can slide out the back door during an active shooter situation, that's what I should do. That's cowardly, frankly. If you're in a restaurant or a school or a church or any place else that's being attacked, a nightclub, and you're armed and a bad guy comes to the door and you slide out the back door and run away, you're a friggin' coward. And you've deserted your public duty to be the militia and be the defense of your community. So, people need to take a reality check about what the right to bear arms is for. It's not just, it certainly is for your own personal self-defense, but it's also for public defense. And if you don't step up and stop the killing, what's going to happen is they're going to give us the false choice, as always, that the only way to stop the killing is for all of us to disarm except the cops. Even though the cops took 3 friggin' hours to get in there and stop the killing, and a bunch of folks bled out, and a bunch of people also died during the raid that did come, 3 hours later. Matt Bracken put up a really good piece. We cross-posted it on our site along with Western Rifle Shooters. He called it Orlando rules. The rules of engagement after Orlando are that you still can't rely on the cops to stop it fast enough because look at that. They waited 3 friggin' hours. And while they did that, people bled to death. People bled out in that club because the cops took too long to go in and stop it. It would be much better to have anybody in the club to have a gun and engage the guy. A much better outcome.
Let me jump in for just a second because this has so many. I have more questions now from this event, and I actually interviewed somebody that was supposedly friends with somebody that was killed in that nightclub, and I have more questions after this interview. So where I'm going with this, Stewart, is could one person have actually gone in there and done the damage that the media says that he did? Do you really think one person would have been able to kill almost 50 people and shoot another almost 50 people with one AR-15? No, he had a Sig Sauer, I'm sorry, with one Sig Sauer. Is that even realistic?
Yeah, I think it is because, like I said, when you have, let's look at this. When you have people who are conditioned to be subservient and just lay on the ground or run and not fight back, that's the first threshold problem. Is the conditioning of the American people, and it's not just in a gay bar. You saw the same thing at Quinnipiac, the college up there in Oregon, where all the students corralled into a corner and waited their turn to be shot without fighting back. We've seen it over and over again. Passive. You saw it in Paris. How come the Frenchmen didn't fight back? They just sat there and let themselves be executed. So we're being conditioned in the West to be, as we talked about earlier, neutered metrosexuals who don't have any cojones, don't know how to fight, have never even thought about what they would do under those situations, have no combat mindset. And so when you have people like that in this culture, we're being conditioned that violence is never the answer. They're being conditioned from childhood on to never fight back and to rely on the cops. They're like sheep, seriously. So, wait for the sheepdog. That's why I hate the sheepdog meme. You're not supposed to be a nation of sheep. So that is the threshold problem. If they could have tackled the guy to the deck, if they had just charged him and tackled him, the killing would have been stopped. But they didn't even have the mindset to do that. Instead, they're running and hiding and waiting or trying to play dead and waiting for the cops to show up. So yeah, it's entirely possible for one gunman to do all that. And then you wait 3 friggin' hours, anybody he shot is going to bleed out. If you have a serious wound, you've got to get a tourniquet on it within a matter of seconds, within under a minute, or you're going to bleed out. Or then you got to get them to the magic hour, they call it. You got to get them to emergency trauma as fast as you possibly can. So the longer you wait, the more they're going to bleed out. So, and then of course, a bunch were killed by the police when they came in. More folks were shot up by the cops on the way in. So it's a recipe for death. It really is. Passive, submissive victims relying on the police gearing up and taking forever to make a decision to go in because of their own safety concerns. All of that is a recipe for disaster.
Well, I'm thinking of this, event that took place with this guy that supposedly was a part of a security force in Britain and also questioned by the FBI several times. I go back to multiple events that have mass casualties according to the mainstream media. And in my opinion, I think some of these could be false flags. And when I say false flag, it doesn't mean I don't believe they're not real. Yet I wonder if there's some type of orchestration behind the scenes to keep funding through security forces, et cetera, to keep the populace at bay going, oh my gosh, I got to be protected from these guys. I got to give up my rights.
Right. Well, I mean, it's certainly possible. Like you said, it was kind of a weird coincidence, I guess you can call it. This guy worked for this massive global security company with all kinds of contracts who refused to fire him. You had several employees came out saying that when they were working there, he was spewing all kinds of radical Islamist views and hatred of people and, racism and hatred of gays and everything else. And yet they never fired the guy. So there are good questions about that. But even if they didn't groom this guy or handle him in some way, look, there's a very obvious intent in the U.S. government to absolutely do nothing about people like this that are coming from radical Islam, and that's just a fact. And I'm a libertarian. I came from Ron Pauler for a long time, for decades, and so like many other libertarians, I had obviously during the Bush administration, the neoconservatives went they jumped the shark and did all kinds of stuff that was very unconstitutional. So for a long time, I, like most libertarians, thought that all of their rhetoric against Islam was just propaganda. But then you look at the big eye opener for me though was the mass demonstrations in Europe calling for the death of the cartoonist who painted a cartoon of Muhammad with a bomb on his head, and it's like they're not groomed operatives for the government. They're just a bunch of Muslims who want to kill this guy because they don't believe in free speech. They don't really believe in free practice of religion. They want to impose Sharia. And that was quite the eye opener for me. So I think the reality is both. You've got political elites in this country and also at the international level who are manufacturing crisis and making things worse. But you also have the reality that Saudi Arabia has exported the Wahhabist radical version of Islam for a long time, since the 1950s, through the Muslim Brotherhood in particular, all over the West, and all these radical clerics and schools that they fund with billions of dollars. They're spreading the most radical wing of the Sunni branch of Islam is the Wahhabist wing, and it's being spread and exported by the Saudi government all over the world. And that's one of our allies, and so the U.S. turns a blind eye to it, is the most benign way to put it. But the other way to put it is they're creating crisis. That's back to that cloud pivot strategy of creating crisis and maximizing crisis so that you can usher in your solution, your so-called solution, which of course is more government power and right up to including world government. That's where we're at.
Well,
So I think radical Islam is part of that. And I would encourage your listeners to go and read an article by Matt Bracken, the Navy SEAL veteran, called Take Two, where he predicted what's happening in Europe right now, that there's an unholy alliance between the radical left and Islam and the radical Islamicists, and they both see Western civilization as their enemy. They both want to destroy it. So, and I think he's right. I think he's right both in Europe and here. But of course, the next step is to say, well, then who's pulling the strings behind the scenes of both? And that's the real question, right?
That's what I was going to ask. And when you look at some of these organizations that seem to make just an enormous amount of profits off of these wars, these defense contractors that are making just hundreds of millions of dollars from missiles and certain equipment that's going back and forth. There's a whole bunch of organizations that gain from these global wars. And it does seem as if there's this global connection, like you said, the New World Order that people say, oh, we're going to see a New World Order. We're going to see a New World Order. I think we're already in a phase of the New World Order. There could be multiple phases beyond this that are more totalitarian and Orwellian, et cetera. I can certainly see that with the technologies that we have. So it's really nice to know that there's people like yourself, Stewart, and the Oath Keepers out there that do want to protect the Constitution and keep people's liberties and freedoms intact. I think that that's so important. There's got to be balance. There's people on the left and on the right, and the media spins both, so people don't know what to believe. It's almost like many individuals out there, they're looking for the truth. They're getting two options. an option on the far left and on the far right. So they're like, okay, which do I
Well,
choose?
but it's not really the far left or far right. I mean, I guess it's just
That's what the
talking about
media spins that, though. I mean, I
right.
don't think.
Talking about left and right is almost useless. It's almost pointless. What does it even mean to be a right winger nowadays? What does it even mean?
Right.
So
I
I think
agree.
the American people are the people of the West are being divided and conquered. But that doesn't mean that look at the Bernie Sanders supporters. He's essentially a communist. Well, he is a communist. Let's not even qualify it. He's a communist, and yet at least half the Democratic Party, probably even more than that, more like 60%, support him because they are also communists. Let's just face reality. The Democratic Party is currently dominated by Marxists. And of course, you call them what they are, and people roll their eyes. Oh, you're afraid of communists. Oh. Well, that's what they are. I went to college, I went to law school. I mean, I was surrounded by true believer Marxists. They believe in the Marxist revolution. And that's exactly who's in power right now in this country. What do you think Barack Obama comes from? He comes both from a Muslim background and a radical Marxist background, and they're not incompatible. People think they're incompatible. You would think they would be, and then the Marxists, if they come to power, or the Islamicists, if they come to power, are going to cut off the heads of all the homosexuals, are going to cut off the heads of all the radical feminists. They're going to be decapitated, and yet they're in bed with these people, and it's because they believe they can use them as a common enemy of the West. They can, the enemy, my enemy is my friend. And Bracken talks about this. It's also a really good book. I can't remember the last name of the author, but it's called Londonistan, about what's going on in England with the importation and support by the left in England of all these radical clerics. Once again, turning a blind eye to radical Islam, or even like wink, wink, nudge, nudge, letting it grow because they want to destroy the West. They think they can control the Islamicists, but they're fools. The Marxists believe that, well, we can use them for our own purposes, and then once we overthrow the West, then we'll be in charge. That's what they think. I think they're nuts because they're going to wind up with their heads on a pole. So that's a reality. I'm not saying there are certainly, like I said, players behind the scenes. George Soros is a good example, right? He funds the Black Lives Matter movement. He helps fund La Raza. He helps fund all these radical Marxist groups that are causing racial division and causing people to, turn on their own country. He's helped funding that, and of course, there's a bunch of other big groups out there, and bankers and trusts and institutions that have done that for many, many, many decades. So they're all over the place. I mean, you can go look at. Skousen wrote a book. Of course, everyone knows about the Naked Communist. We wrote one called The Naked Capitalist about how all of these Western bankers and wealthy institutions fund a lot of these radical anti-U.S. groups. So that's been a reality for a long time. That they're once again they're using them as their proxies. They're using them to destroy and cause chaos, and out of that will come their phoenix, right, rising up out of the ashes.
That seems to be their motto: order out of chaos. And
Right.
I remember back in 2008 when George Bush was about ready to step down from being president, and there was some chatter on certain internet forums and alternative websites, as well as some insider information that I heard that there might be a delay in the elections, martial law might take place. And it never
Right.
happened, but I heard it got pretty close. And there's a lot of chatter about that going on right now. But one thing that I do want to bring up that we talked about before the show, and I think that this is just super important, because you look at what's going on with the media now. And the media, obviously, it's a business, so they have to make money. They're a profitable industry. So what do? Well, they look for big industries and lobbyists, et cetera, to push their agendas. And also the defense contractors and the government is also heavily funded with the media, so they can push certain things. But with what they seem to push out now is this, give up your guns if you believe in Jesus, or if you're middle class, or if you're married, then you're prejudiced. If you're white, you're racist. Just whatever. They'll spin it on anybody they can, no matter what color or creed or religion you are. They always use that divide and conquer tactic. So I see behind the scenes, they don't have our best interests at heart. When I say us, I'm referring to the American people. So do you think there's like a coup in play? Because the Communist Manifesto, when you read those basically signatures, although yes, communism did fall with the Soviet Union, it seems like the people at the very top levels want some type of new system where they take away our rights and our freedoms, and it's like this Marxist meets corporatocracy meets communism.
Well, yeah, and that's why I say calling it left or right is kind of irrelevant. It's totalitarianism versus individual liberty. That's the only real, dichotomy we need to focus on. Either you believe in individual liberty and limited government, or no government if you're a radical, anarchist. Either you believe in individual liberty or you don't. And if you don't, and you're believing unlimited power in the hands of the government, then I don't care if you call it fascism or communism, it's the same damn thing. It always winds up with an unlimited power in the hands of one man or one small body of men that rule everybody else and have the power of life and death over them, where no one has any recognized individual rights. That's where you lead to, whether it's under Stalin or Hitler or a Mussolini, Franco. It doesn't make a difference who it is. And on this topic, you know, in this country, we definitely have a shadow government. It's been there since the Cold War, at the very least, going back to the Cold War. But of course, beyond that, back to the Federal Reserve, right? So you always had these bankers pulling the strings for a long time in this country and running things from behind the scenes. But the shadow government definitely grew after World War II. In the name of fighting the Cold War against communism, you had this permanent military industrial complex to come up that Eisenhower talked about and warned about. And it's a reality. And the NSA and the CIA and all of that is part of the shadow government that's been there and growing ever since. And they're unaccountable. They're off, black budgets and all that kind of stuff. They're just completely unaccountable. And that's who really calls the shots, I believe, in this country. Now they might have masters beyond them that are using them for their own purposes as well. But that's a reality. I mean, the NSA is this massive Gestapo-like entity that spies, or Stasi-like entity that spies on the American people. It's no longer even having a pretense of being about foreign policy. It's all very internal, and it's very clear. That's why you have people that are running around afraid to join my group or other groups. They're afraid to be put on the list. They know that Big Brother's watching because he tells them. They leak out. Part of the reason why a lot of this stuff gets leaked out, they want you to know. They want you to know that every email, everything you say on the phone is being monitored, and you're being categorized according to the threat level that you present to the government. They want you to be afraid of that. Just like in East Germany, everybody knew they're being monitored, so they would self-censor. I think that's the danger we're in, is that we can expose it all we want, but unless the American people not only understand what's happening, but build a spirit of resistance against it and resolve to put an end to it, so at some point we got to put an end to it. Unless we have that growing spirit of resistance and then start organizing for local resistance in our communities and being ready to, when they do drop the hammer and attempt to declare martial law or whatever they try to do to finally, usher in their dream utopia, we need to be ready to fight back. And if we're not morally and psychologically prepared for that, then we're going to wind up like the East Germans, where they just submitted, or the Russians. They could see it. It's all around them. The Stasi's there, but they're not going to do anything because they're afraid. They're individually afraid to do anything, and they're hoping that it will pass them and their family by. And Solzhenitsyn, the famous Russian dissident, talked about this. In his book, The Gulag Archipelago, he talked about how, a famous quote from him is how we burn in the camps later, wondering what if things had been different? What if we had realized that we had nothing to lose by fighting back, and instead of hiding in our apartments, hoping that the knock on the door, during mass arrest would not come to our door, but instead would go to our neighbors. Instead, if we realized that we had nothing to lose, we would have fought back together, then the machine would have ground to a halt because it would have run out of officers. And his point is, I think, is an important one. Stalin didn't have to call out the Russian military. He didn't have to use the great body of the Russian army against the people. He could just use select special secret officers and his henchmen to go and round people up because people were isolated and alone and didn't fight back. If you fight back, going back to the militia, if the entire community is united, organized, and trained to be the militia, it makes a secret police impossible. They can't go and use a secret police on a united community because they'll get their asses kicked. But if you're isolated in your own house, everyone's afraid to organize together. Everyone's afraid to help each other. Don't even know each other. Most people don't even know their own neighbors. Then they can pick you up one at a time. That's why I think once again I think the prepper movement has done this. They've focused on being secret squirrels. Don't tell anybody you're prepping. You're entirely isolated and secret. Even the militia movement, like here in Montana, the militia of Montana, John Trockman, the guy who started the so-called militia of Montana, has from the very beginning advocated secret three-man cells. Well, that's not a friggin' militia. That's a secret resistance cell. It's not a militia. A militia is capable of providing public defense, and public defense not just against thugs and criminals or invaders, but also a public defense against tyranny. Lexington and Concord, it was the entire town that turned out, and all of the able-bodied men from all the nearby communities showed up. That's why Gage could not rely on a small group of officers to go arrest John Hancock and Sam Adams. He had to send, large units to go do this because of the militia, and they still got their butts kicked. So there's a very real purpose in resistance to tyranny of uniting with your neighbors. You want the tyrant to have to try to use the U.S. Marine Corps or the U.S. Army on you, because then they don't have the sellout mercenaries, our versions of the Hessians, guys, contractors will do anything they're told to do.
Right.
You can always find someone like that, right? But if you can have a united community that will defend itself together, you can't just use a small team of selected contractors or a small team of well-vetted special operators that have sold their soul to Satan. You can't use them because they won't. You can try, but they're going to get their butts kicked. It doesn't make a difference how high speed they are against a united community that their asses handed to them. So that forces the bad guy, the tyrant, to then try to use the large mass of the standing army of the Marine Corps against the American people, and they're not all going to go along with it. So then they understand that. They understand there's a serious split in the ranks, so there would be against such orders. It's already a reality. And we've helped to make that even more so. It's been one of our goals. But the tyrant has to have the ability to use a secret police to do the worst things he's going to do to his own people. He will never be able.
Great, we got disconnected. Well, folks, this is the first disconnect we've got here. About 44 minutes into the presentation. I was wondering when that was going to happen. Looks like we're trying to call him back right now, so stand by.
Well, I mean, this is taking a step back. This is the reality that the founders told us is timeless. It requires a militia to be secure or free and free. Like it says in the Second Amendment, a well-regulated militia being necessary for the security of a free state. The right of people to bear arms should not be infringed. It's necessary to have security, and whether it's from private criminals, from social disruption and riots, whether it's from, as the Constitution lays out, the three purposes that Congress can call forth the militia for is to repel invasions, suppress insurrections, and also to execute the laws of the Union. All of those are supposed to be relying on the people themselves as the militia. And the point about executing the laws of the Union is something that a lot of gun rights people don't even focus on. If the president has to rely on you, the militia of the several states, to call you into federal service to go and enforce, his so-called laws or edicts, and you disagree and believe they're unconstitutional, you can tell him to go pound sand. He wouldn't have a DHS. He wouldn't have an FBI. He wouldn't have an FBI HRT to go shoot Lavoy Finicum and that kind of stuff. He wouldn't have any of these things. He'd have to rely on the militia. That's the actual constitutional homeland security, as Edwin Vieira talks about in his book of that same title, Constitutional Homeland Security. He's right. That's supposed to be the militia. But the American people have abdicated that responsibility, and instead you have this false artificial notion that, in a modern society, we're supposed to just rely on the police and rely on the government to do everything for us. Well, there's no such thing as a free lunch. When you do that, you wind up not being secure, and you wind up not being free, because now you have an oppressive government that's going to grow. And you're going to have the standing army, and I would count police as part of the standing army. You have that growing, and they're obedient. They tend to be more obedient towards whoever's paying their paycheck. I think that's less so with the military. I think we still have a lot of military people that really don't care if they're not career military guys like myself. I never intended to serve my life in the military. I went in to do my duty and as part of my family heritage, and that was it. Did my 4 years. That was my intent. I probably would not have re-upped even if I hadn't had an accident. Point is that, but the founders understood that it's human nature that if someone's paying your paycheck and your whole career is wrapped around being in this unit, whether it's military or police, you're going to be more obedient. You're going to tend to do what you're told to do. And you're also going to see yourself as separate from and above the people. If you're a special warrior class, you tend to look down on the people. This is historic reality. So there's that ancient question since ancient Greece of who shall guard the guardians. When you have a warrior class of guardians in a society and everybody else is a worker bee, eventually the warriors look around and go, we have all the guns. We're the ones with the military knowledge. We should run everything. And you wind up in a military dictatorship. Or you wind up in a dictatorship with the military as the obedient, subservient enforcers of the dictator. This is just historic reality. So the founders understood that, and their answer is that the people themselves must be the military power of the nation. period. And the people themselves are also the law enforcement or peace officer function in their community, period. And the further away you get from that, the more problems you're going to have. Look at the situation we're in now with cops. It's a fact that most police in this country will turn a blind eye to bad behavior by other cops. They will not try to do what Frank Serpico did. They will not try to blow the whistle because they don't want to be fired. They don't want to be, blackballed and ostracized by their brother officers, which is exactly what happened to them. Frank Serpico said not too long ago in an interview with Politico a couple of years ago, he said, when the bad cops fear the good cops, then we will see real change in what happens among police. He said, we're not there yet. And even after all these years, we're not there yet. And he's right. Because most police, they see themselves, that's their entire identity. They identify themselves as cops. Their career, their paycheck, their mortgage, their pension, everything's wrapped up in being a cop and not losing their job. And so they're more likely to go along with whatever happens. And we've seen this again and again. Very few police are willing to throw away their careers to do the right thing. And it's just hard fact. I know some good cops because we got them right here inside of our own org. I know some very good stand-up, ethical police officers, but not enough of the good guys are calling out the bad guys, and I think it's because of their job. And that's why you're seeing, and then and when and Serpico talked about this also, police don't have real accountability, not enough. It takes a videotape of a cop killing someone to even have a chance of them being prosecuted, and even sometimes even when there is videotape, they're not prosecuted. Look at that kid in Cleveland, a 12-year-old kid that was killed by a police officer who, it turns out it was a toy gun, but the cop, instead of doing the smart thing and addressing him from a long distance from behind the car on his PA, on his megaphone, instead he drives right up, jumps out of the car and shoots the kid at close range, and then tries to say he had no choice because he was under threat of a possible gun. Well, it turned out to be a toy, the 12-year-old kid with a toy. If that were to happen to a kid here in Montana, if some local kid was out, even plinking with his 22, and some cop just rolled up right on him and shot him, that'd be a dead cop because his family would get revenge. I'm telling you what, this is what happened in rural Montana. I'm not advocating that, let's be clear on that, but the point is that the police have become out of control in this country. It's just a friggin' fact. And it's not, the bone I have to pick with Black Lives Matter, it's not a racial issue. It's happening across the country in every community. Look at this situation we had with Jack Yantis, a rancher in Idaho. One of his bulls gets hit by a car. He goes out there. The sheriff deputies are out there, and he goes to go and put the bull out of its misery. He goes and takes his .44 Magnum out of his holster to kill it, and then they shoot him because a man with a gun. And they just react and shoot the rancher. He was no threat to them. He was putting the bull out of his misery. And yet those officers have now been completely exonerated. There's going to be no prosecution, not even a chance for the community to pass judgment as a grand jury or a jury. The state investigated it and decided not to prosecute. What a surprise. So cops out there have got to understand that they are absolutely losing the credibility and the goodwill of the American people. It's happening across the spectrum in every demographic, not just among black people. I know plenty of veterans out there of every race who now don't like cops. I'm having a tough time getting them to see the need to support their local police and unify with them. That's what we're trying to do right now. We're launching what we call Operation Backstop, which is a counter to all the attacks on police we're seeing. And the point of it is not to, be what they call a cop sucker, someone who just always supports cops. That's not the point. Our goal here is to say to the police, you have basically your last chance to do what's right. You must police yourselves. You must control the bad ones and root them out of your departments. And during this time, while we're giving you a chance to do this, we will back you up and help you and protect you. As long as you're on the side of the Constitution, we're with you. I think it's important for the Patriot movement in particular to have that message to police that we will back you up, and we already have with the Oath Keepers. We've done it very, very personally and very directly, backed up good cops. Just the other day, our Baton Rouge chapter went into the Baton Rouge Police Department and the sheriff's office there and gave them a letter of support saying that we will stand with you and defend you so long as you honor your oath. I think it's important for us to do that, but at the same time, they have got to police their own. They have got to clean out the bad ones, because if they don't, there will be no safety for them in any community. It won't be just among blacks. It's going to be everywhere. And I think they're seeing now the reality is that there's not enough MRAPs in the world or enough, select fire M16s or M4s to keep them safe if their local community turns against them. Only the goodwill of the people is going to be their safety. So I think it's really important for them to start, doing what's right and adhering to the Constitution and policing up and purging out the bad ones. They have to do that now. They can't just say, every time a police officer is involved in a shooting, we're going to close ranks around him and support him no matter what. They can't do that, because if they do that, they continue to do that, they're going to lose credibility. Certainly he has a right to a fair hearing, but if he's done something wrong, they should be the first ones to say it.
Absolutely. And with your network of military and security personnel, do you have any insider information in regards to the coming elections being suspended?
Well, I mean, there were those leaked. Someone hacked into Del Rey. Was it what's his last name? Mackeson, the guy who's the Black Lives Matter leader. They hacked into his phone. Someone did, and then they published what they claim to be personal messages back and forth between him and other Black Lives Matter leaders, talking about them coordinating with Lord Lynch, the Attorney General, to cause disruptions going into the elections so that Obama can declare an emergency, declare martial law, and retain himself in office. So, I mean, I don't know if those were legitimate or not. I think they are, but I think that kind of points to, a possible smoking gun of that plan. But even if those were not, even if those were like, someone created those messages and they're not legit, I think that's certainly consistent with their behavior. And you can look at the behavior of both the administration and Black Lives Matter movement and other radical leftists. Their stated, in fact, some of these radical Marxist groups, their stated goal was to shut down the RNC and the DNC and prevent the elections from happening. So I think that their behavior and intention is certainly consistent with that. It's a risk. I think that you mentioned earlier that folks thought, ironically, a lot of leftists thought that Bush would do the same thing, right? They thought that he was going to find some way to suspend the election. I think that's always a possibility. This is the problem with when the government grows beyond the bounds of the Constitution and has powers never intended to be in its hands. And all right, thanks. That's Jack, Navy Jack, one of our writers. He just said there's a really nasty police shooting in Chicago with really bad, speaking of the devil, but a really bad video that looks pretty indefensible. This is the problem in the video age. We're going to see what happens, So
Absolutely.
cops are going to have to police themselves. The good cops are going to have to, when you got a bad guy in the ranks, you've got to purge him out one way or another. I mean, a blanket party, rubber hoses in the back room, whatever you got to do to square him away. Because here's the problem. I used to work as a criminal defense attorney here in Montana. I'm no longer an attorney now, but I can tell you from my own limited experience, even in small town Montana, there's corruption and there's a blind eye to bad behavior. And the judicial system in this country has been set up over time to where police are almost unaccountable, as far as legally. Most prosecutors are incredibly pro-cop, blindly pro-cop, will never prosecute a police officer. In fact, in the town I used to work in, the local prosecutor was a reserve deputy. He had a complete, total conflict of interest and bias. He was actually on the police department. Is he ever going to prosecute one of those guys? Never, So there's no accountability there. The people no longer have the power of the grand jury to go do their own investigations. You got to rely on the prosecutor, and if the prosecutor won't do it, then you're done. And if you go try to sue him civilly, the courts have set it up so that it's almost impossible to sue a police officer for wrongful death or violation of civil rights. You have to prove that he intended to do it. Not that he just did it, but that he intended to do so with the intent of violating your rights. I've had several cases where I had to just drop the case, and I just told the client, "Sorry, man, the law is so stacked against you, you haven't got a prayer. It's not even worth trying." But you have to prove a malicious intent, not just that he wrongfully arrested you, but that he intended to do so with malicious intent. And so there's no accountability legally. And Frank Serpico talked about this. I encourage folks to go find that Politico article. In fact, I'll post it on Oath Keepers this weekend, so you'll see it. But he said in there that a police officer, when he puts on his uniform, puts on his gun, his badge, walks out the door, knows that he really can actually shoot someone and not have, pretty much get away with murder. He can go out there and do whatever he wants, and he will be covered, unless it's really egregious. Unless he rapes somebody on video, practically, he's going to get off. So, and it's been there have been some prosecutions of police that have done bad stuff, but it's so rare because the police unions close ranks, everyone closes ranks, prosecutors close ranks, and usually they exonerate them. And this is the reality. And, the equation is starting to change. I warned about this two years ago about that, and I made a comment on that piece by Serpico. I said police have to understand that they're exposed. If the people turn against them, once again, there'll be no possible security for them. Now, what's being set up, though, is that the elites pulling the strings want to nationalize the police. They want to, and you're seeing this with this whole, safe cities thing with the UN, and then now the UN looking at U.S. police practices. They want to nationalize and even internationalize the cops. And this is what they're offering as their solution. The cops, in order to have any legitimacy again and reform themselves, must be nationalized and even internationalized. That's their only safety. That's what they're trying to tell the cops. So that's why it's important for us in the Patriot movement, even though a lot of us really are rightfully angry at a lot of the abuse of power by police in this country, we have to be willing to go to the cops and say, there's another way to do this. That way is we will back you up against the cop killers if you reform, if you come back to the Constitution. We'll provide some shelter for you to get your stuff together and reform yourselves locally. But nationalizing them is a really bad idea. I mean, every dictatorship in world history has nationalized the police and brought them under the authority of the leader. And so whether it's your nightmare of a president of Hillary Clinton or the left's nightmare of Donald Trump, imagine them controlling your local cops. You don't want that. You want the people in your community to control the police. So the people in our local communities must step up and fill that vacuum. We must have oversight, citizens panels. We must have some serious work being done by our sheriffs and by our towns over the police chiefs to clean up the police departments and put a stop to any abuse. If you don't, you're going to wind up with nationalized police.
I mean, if you see some of the vehicles that police departments have nowadays, you'll find these little villages essentially where they've got these tanks without the cannon. The stuff that they use now, it's definitely like stormtroopers on steroids sometimes when you see these people. And
Right.
I'm thinking about the Boston Marathon debacle where they basically shut down parts of the city, went door to door looking for the pressure cooker bombers. And
Right.
it was like their way of like beta testing, seeing how far people would go and how many rights they'd give up and how long they'd be willing to leave their house
Well, it's
based
also a
on
reflection.
terrorism.
It's a reflection of our society too. It's not just beta testing. It's a reflection of what's already there. Like I said, it's a complete flip of the founders' ideal. In the founders' day, what would have happened is what they call the hue and the cry would have went up. Everybody in Watertown, Massachusetts, in the founders' day, if there was a fugitive who had just slaughtered a bunch of people and he's running around hiding somewhere, every able-bodied man would have come out of his house with a lantern in one hand, his musket in the other, or a hatchet, and he would have went out and found the guy. The people themselves would have done it. And ironically, that's kind of what happened, right? All the SWAT guys running around. I mean, they pointed guns at women and children and old people, making them come out of their house with their hands above their heads, like a scene out of Nazi Germany. And yet none of that worked to find the guy. It was a guy that owned the boat, saw that his boat cover had been disturbed, and that's how they found him.
And
So in the end,
I got to
didn't do
ask you a
anything at all.
question real quick, and I'm sorry to interrupt. I really am, but I think that this is important to ask you. I've asked others this question before. You were in the military. You definitely have more knowledge about this than I do. If you saw the official picture of the guy being pushed in a wheelchair, and in the background there's somebody wearing a cowboy hat and an Asian gal, and this person that's being in a wheelchair shows that he's got his legs, no legs, and there's no trail of blood. The guy looks like he's got makeup on to make his cheeks look sucked in. And wouldn't somebody, if they had their legs blown off, bleed out in a very short amount of time? And what happened to the trail of blood? I mean, did they clean it up before they took the picture?
I don't know. I really can't comment on that because I don't have it in front of me. But I mean, if you put tourniquets on somebody, they can stop the bleeding fast enough. If you have someone there to put a tourniquet on it, yeah. But I really don't know. So I know there's all kinds of questions around the Boston bombing. But the point is, whether it's a legit bombing or not, the point is that the solution's always the same. The offered solution by by the elites is give it more of your rights, have more surveillance, more hyper-militarized police. This is your only safety. That's what they're telling us and the cops. Cops now are going to want to militarize. They're going to want to have masks on. They're going to want to be anonymous. All that kind of crap is coming as their supposed solution. That's not going to make them safe because it'll just alienate them even more from the community. It's going to make it worse. So, and on our side, for the Patriots, the answer is the militia. The answer is getting off your butt and organizing a neighborhood watch and then a town watch and being the security force for your community. Look, if you're a hardcore patriot and you're now hostile to police. Okay, what's your alternative? What's your alternative for providing community security? If you won't institutionalize or reinvent or reestablish the militia, if you won't do that in your community, what are you going to sell to your neighbors as their alternative to cops? You want to replace the cops? Great. Replace them with the militia. Go out there and build it. That way you won't need professional police. So that's, and that was kind of our message to the people of Ferguson. If you don't want cops in your neighborhood that you think are going to be abusive, then get off your butt and go police your own neighborhood. You should be forming up your own neighborhood watches. You should be kicking the crap out of the friggin' thugs and all the drug gangs, getting them the hell out of your community. Do it yourselves. Then the cops will have no excuse or reason to come into your community. You take care of your own. But you can't not do that and sit on your butt and let the gangs overrun your neighborhood and then bitch at the cops when they come in to go clean it up. You can't have it both ways. Get off your ass and go do it yourself. And that goes for every American out there. If you're a patriot, you need to be forming a neighborhood watch. If you're not doing that, you're not doing your job. Okay? Then you need to form a town watch. And every church needs to have a security team inside the church. Right now, ISIS just told us they're going to start hitting Christians, right? And they already killed cut that priest's throat in France. Good example of the sheep out there. These are two guys with knives. The entire church empties out. They all run away, leave the old priest there to be decapitated, while someone's forced to hold a camera. The guy actually, obeys the orders of the knifers and holds the camera and videotapes the priest having his throat slit. It's just like a bunch of cowards. So go look in the mirror. That's what I'm saying. If you want to fix this problem in this country and across the world, people in the West need to man up, go look in the mirror, and then make sure that they fulfill the function of guarding their own security and that of their church and their school and their town. If you don't do that, then you really got no right to bitch about the militarization of the cops. They're going to keep getting worse and worse because you haven't provided an alternative.
Stewart, you're making way too many points that have a lot of common sense. And I think there's a new psychological condition now to that. So, yeah, you may need to start taking medication because you're just making way too much sense, man. They need to assimilate you better and change the chemicals in your brain so you can't think for yourself and start being a mouthpiece for the system. And I just got to make a real quick comment here, and I think this is really important because I asked you about the Boston Marathon thing, and the comment that you made, it doesn't matter whether it's real or not. I think that's a huge point, and people need to realize that.
It does. I mean, certainly if your government's pulling false flags, it matters. But what I'm saying is that
the outcome's the same.
Even if it's a legitimate terrorist attack, the solution's still the same.
Yeah, and that's a really good point. I think that people need to, instead of fighting so much, finding out whether it was a staged event, a conspiracy, nobody got hurt, everybody got hurt, or whatever, just realize the outcome, what they want to happen is going to be the same. And that's, I think, a really important point that you made there. So I much appreciate it. And I would also like to know, because there's so much out there about the Bundy Ranch debacle, what really happened? What's that about?
Well, which one? You mean the Mahler occupation? Or you mean
I mean both. First, I want to get into the Bundy Ranch, and then the other one, the Wildlife Refuge in Oregon standoff as well.
Well, I think Bundy Ranch on the balance was a success. I mean, there were problems there. We all, unfortunately, a lot of it came out because we had to put a video. I mean, we were attacked publicly. We had to put a video out defending ourselves. A bunch of infighting that should have been handled internally, not put on YouTube. This is one of the problems in the Patriot movement. There's no friggin' discipline about airing dirty laundry. They just go out there and badmouth each other like crazy. It's not just with us. I'm not just, I don't have just a bone to pick on my side. It's all over the place. Have some discipline, guys. You got a problem with somebody, call them up on the phone and settle it personally. Don't fucking put it all. Sorry, I didn't mean to cuss.
That's okay.
Don't put it all over YouTube. Don't put a big proclamation out on YouTube condemning people, and then they have to defend themselves on YouTube. It's just really kind of dumb. So there were a lot of problems there. Okay. Just air some stuff out right now. We had back to the idea about poser militia guys. We had one guy parading around with colonel wings. He was no colonel. He'd never been in the military. He was a complete clown. Didn't know what he was doing at all. And yet he was there, and he should have been kicked out. They should have just sent him packing. And that's one of the problems with the Bundy family is that they have this idea in their heads that God is going to send people to help them, and they have to accept whoever God sends. And so they had at Bundy Ranch and again at Malheur, they had posers who had never even been in the military. Buddha turned out to be a fake Marine, never even served in the Marine Corps. Pathetic. They had convicted felons. They had, in fact, in Malheur, that one guy was convicted murderer, killed his own father, and yet they accepted him. Even when they found out his record, they still let him stay there. So that's just completely foolish. Okay, you lose credibility in the eyes of the community, and not just in the broader population, but also in the eyes among veterans and other patriots. You don't let clowns into your ranks, otherwise you lose credibility. So that was a problem. And that was a problem in both situations. Even worse at Malheur, you know. Like that one guy that paraded around in a diaper challenging Chris Christie to a sumo match. I
Wasn't
mean,
that
that's
his
just
cousin or brother or something?
no. I don't know who that was, but I mean, really don't. It doesn't make a difference. It doesn't matter. But here he is at the Malheur occupation, standing out there in the cold, in basically a diaper, you know, a big loincloth or whatever,
Yeah, I remember
challenging
that.
Chris. It was horrendous. It was like, what is this, Saturday Night Live? You know, it's like
It
they
was
live down in the
crazy.
van by the river. It just you know, you got to have some discipline, man. You really do. But anyway, point is, I think Bundy Ranch, even with all the stuff that happened, and the balance was a success. The bad guys blinked, they backed off, and they got a big black eye. And they
Who,
wanted revenge for that. They
who,
wanted their pound of flesh. And I think, unfortunately, Ammon Bundy handed his own head, and his father did the same thing on a platter. They, by doing what they did at Malheur, they gave the feds their opportunity to get revenge for Bundy Ranch. They made it easy on them to go in and get their revenge because they were perceived as being illegitimate and as being the aggressors by a great number of Americans before they did at Malheur, you know. And it's also just plain old bad tactics and bad strategy. And look, anytime you go up against Leviathan, you're in a tactical situation. I know there's a bunch of people out there saying, oh, this wasn't a tactical situation. Come on, guys. Whenever you go up against the bad guys, they start showing up with the HRT, you're in a tactical situation. Whether you want to recognize it or not, that's what that is. And that was horrible. The terrain there, if you're going to pick a place to have a possible confrontation, don't pick a place that looks like an Air Force bombing range. You know, it's got no cover, no trees, nothing. You know, no broken terrain, wide open. That was just foolish. And they weren't even in defense of an actual person. So, you know, the best man there was Lavoy Finicum, beyond a doubt. He was head and shoulders above Ammon and his guys, the best man there. And the only reason he was there is because he thought he was going to a one-day protest and then go back to his ranch in Arizona. And then, bam, he got blindsided by Ammon's crazy plan to go take over the wildlife refuge. And Lavoy, being Ammon's friend, felt honor bound to stay with him. You know, and I called, talked to Lavoy just 2 days before his death, trying to encourage him to see the reality of the situation they were in and get out of there. I mean, our guys went there and looked. They were there on the ground, saw the buildup of the equipment and the men that the feds had been putting in place, and they could see this was going to end badly. They were about ready to drop the hammer on them. And so we called Lavoy, and in fact, two of our guys, Todd Engels, one of the Oath Keepers that went down there, and met with Ammon in person. He didn't get a chance to talk to Lavoy, but he went and met with Ammon and said, you know, here's our assessment. We think they're about to drop the hammer based on what we're seeing with our own eyeballs in town, the buildup and the equipment being put in place. Ammon wouldn't listen, so we tried to talk to Lavoy. It's like, hey, look, Lavoy, we're going to tell you the same thing we told Ammon. Here's what we see coming. You guys need to relocate. Go move somewhere where there's a sheriff who will stand up, that you can get behind that sheriff, make that your focus of effort, a place where you have local popular support, a local sheriff on your side, and in defense of an actual ranch. That makes more sense. In other words, what Lavoy would have done on his own ranch in Arizona. Lavoy had already said he's not going to pay any more grazing fees. If they want to come for him, they'll have to come get him on his own land, and his local sheriff was in his corner. That was the smart way to go. You're going to take a hard stand, do it on your own property with local support where you are clearly in the right, and they have to aggress on you, like at Bundy Ranch. What you don't do is go out someplace else where you don't have local support, where the sheriff's not on your side, and where you're not actually defending the rights of an actual person, like a rancher. That's what Malheur was. It was trying to create another Bundy Ranch where one wasn't there. It wasn't there organically. It wasn't even happening. They went and tried to create it. You know, the Hammonds decided to go ahead and roll over and go to jail. What are you going to do? So you got no one to defend. So instead of just saying, okay, let's go back to Lavoy's ranch, take a hard stand there or someplace else like that, you know, Ammon got in his head that he was going to just take over the refuge for the people. And Mike Vanderbilt called it. He said basically it's pretty much channeling John Brown. You know, let's go ahead and just jump the gun and go aggress and take over this land, and just you know, just foolish behavior. He had no chance of success, and it was basically a buffalo jump. That's what Matt Bracken called it. I was talking to Matt Bracken in email exchanges about what happened there, and he referred to it as a buffalo jump, which is, you know, where you run the buffalo off the cliff, right?
Uh huh.
So get a bunch of folks to show up and do something really stupid, and they all wind up either dead or going to prison. That's the only outcome that's going to happen. So, but anyway, I think the best man there was Lavoy Finicum, and unfortunately, and I think he could have been a great leader. I think he already was, but he was put in a situation where he was out of his element, off his own land, and now that's why he's dead. That and the fact that the FBI, I think, murdered him, frankly.
Do you think they did that
Yeah.
specifically because of who he was and his character?
Well, let's put it this way. We did a webinar last week with Matt Bracken and also with John Kerriman on there, one of our defensive tactics instructors. He is a Missouri Police defensive tactics instructor, and he said the HRT doesn't miss. They fired at least 2 or 3 rounds at Lavoy as soon as he got out of the vehicle. Later on, they tried to hide the shell casings and cover it up, but later on it came out that the FBI had fired on him. Someone from the HRT had shot at him as soon as he got out of his vehicle. And John's opinion was they don't miss. They intended to miss. They shot at him to make him go for his gun. That's pretty much his opinion. And I think he's probably right. Why else would they fire 3 rounds at him and then cover it up and try to hide that fact? It's because they wanted him to feel like he had no choice but to fight so that he would be killed in a gunfight with the Oregon State Police. And guess what happened? He was killed in a gunfight with the Oregon State Police. At first he had his hands up, then he decides to go for his gun. Why? Because he was being fired at. That's why. And he just knew he was going to be killed. So I think John's right. I think Lavoy was intentionally set up by the HRT. Okay, that's what I think.
Mm-hmm. And
gee, what a surprise! The same guys at Waco that were filmed. Later on, the 4 camera comes out that there's gun flashes in the back. Anyone trying to come out of the building are being fired upon. I think it's the same MO. Shoot at people or shoot people. Try to cover it up that you even did it, and then try to sell a different story.
now you remember back. So are you talking about Waco with the motorcycle guys
No,
or the original?
well,
Okay, yeah.
You do that too, right?
Well, that's
I'm talking about the Branch Davidians. The film Waco,
Mm-hmm.
the true Waco New Revelations, and the first one, Waco Rules of Engagement. I think they both showed that obviously the HRT was there and they were all around it, and folks who were trying to get out were shot at or shot. And I also heard from an SF veteran who was watching real time, and he said that they parked the Bradley fighting vehicles right over the escape hatch where the women and children were in that buried bus. There's an escape hatch, and they parked that friggin' armored vehicle right over the top of them so they could not get out. That's what he said. So they were just murdered. They were just flat out murdered.
And would that boil down to somebody giving those specific orders? Do you think that you'd ever be able
Yes.
to pinpoint who it was?
Maybe in the post-revolutionary tribunals we'll figure out who did it. But this is the reality. Look, guys, even if you want to believe any of that, the FBI just told you what they're really about when they refused to recommend prosecution of Hillary Clinton, even though she's caught red-handed breaking the law. You or I do anything like that, you can guarantee we'll be prosecuted, put in prison. No doubt. If I did any kind of felony and they had a smoking gun proof that I did a felony, I'm gone. You're gone too. Any of you, you're done. Her, no doubt she committed a felony, but they recommend not prosecuting. Why? Well, come on. Because they're part of the regime. They're not going to. Of course, then the DOJ says, "Oh, we have to take a recommendation to the FBI." It's all smoke and mirrors. So it's just a bunch of crap. And here's the risk. Back what I was saying earlier. The risk is that the gloves are coming off, the mask is coming off. You do live in a dictatorship. There's an oligarchy that rule you. Get over it. What are you going to do about it? That's kind of what they're saying now. We're going to put you in prison. We're going to falsify evidence. We're going to shoot at you and force you to fire back. It's going to be disclosed, but nothing to be done about it. We're going to let some big political muckety muck get away with felonies. We're not going to do anything about that. In fact, she'll wind up being the next president. What are you going to do about it? That's kind of the message. So going right back to the earlier point, and I'm going to keep beating this dead horse or this drum. The only real solution is you acting like an American again. What I mean by that is uniting with your neighbors and doing the hard work. All the guys that are like hotheads that want to go, we need to start the revolution now. They haven't done any legwork in their community to build. They don't even have a friggin' fire team, most of them. Who's on your buddy team, who's on your fire team, who's on your squad, who is in your local community that you train with regularly, who's on your home defense in your own neighborhood to guard your family while you're gone, who's in your town militia. You don't have one? How are you going to be secure? How do you expect to resist as a community if you don't have that? Back to the secret cell crap, that's not going to get it done. It's just not. A secret cell is not going to provide security when the elites pull the plug on the economy, or with mass terror attacks or a manufactured race war or any combination of those things that they'll use to usher in their excuse for martial law. None of that is going to be countered by a secret cell. A secret cell will not fix any of that. You have to have a militia to provide security and also to have the capacity of community united resistance. That's what you need to have. And then out of that, you can have your Sons of Liberty elements that are like the secret cells, right? The founders had both. They had a very public militia, made up of everybody in the community, all the able-bodied men, and they also had the Sons of Liberty, which were a so-called secret organization, even though most folks knew who they were. But they had both, yin and yang. So look at it like that. Effective resistance requires both. Like Solzhenitsyn said, if they had all united, he didn't say, if only we had had secret cells in Russia to resist the tyranny. No, what he said is we needed to have everybody in the community unite and fight back and kick the secret police's ass. That's what he said. And, I'm paraphrasing. But he said we should have just united and ambushed them on the way into the tenement housing. Rather than hiding in our apartments as isolated individuals, we should have come together with anything we could find, axes, pokers, hammers, and just ambushed them and killed the secret police. That's what they should have done. Because Stalin would have run out of secret police. He would have then have been forced to try to use a standing Russian army, and they would have been much more likely to resist him. And they had the capacity to resist. Why? Because they're the friggin' army. If you're an isolated man with a small family and they come through your door, they will always have an artificial superiority of force over you at that moment if you're by yourself. And they can use the secret police. They can use the local SWAT team that's sold out and is bought into the program. They will use them as force multipliers. That's why they're putting all this training and equipment out there to local SWAT teams. They want them to be their force multipliers. That will work every time against any isolated individual and his family, right? Every friggin' time. You're done. But if you organize as a community, like the founders had at Lexington or Concord, that won't work. The local SWAT team cannot do it. HRT cannot do it. No one could do it against a united community. They have to bring out the Marine Corps or the Army. And good luck getting the U.S. Marine Corps, for example, to turn on the American people. It'd be very, very difficult. You will see at least a 50-50 split, if not more so, in the ranks. That's what I'm saying. So, but the other way they can trick the Marine Corps or the Army, though, into going along with crap is to cause an economic collapse and cause a massive crisis that they perceive as being so serious that it justifies so-called martial law, which is nowhere in the Constitution. So that's the other risk we have, is that they would create a crisis so bad the military would go along with it, like during Katrina.
Is that what you think is going to be the fire starter, essentially, is like maybe a bank virus, bank holidays, financial collapse?
Yeah, I think so. Well, I consider it a perfect storm. We're seeing this right now, right? You've got Black Lives Matter, the new Black Panther Party. You got people running around killing cops now. And all of that, unfortunately, is racially motivated, not just against police, but also racially motivated. I think Black Lives Matter is a racist movement. I really do. I think they're perpetuating racial division rather than healing it. And I think this is being done intentionally. And same goes for La Raza, which is a very racist organization that's trying to get Hispanic Americans to identify along racial lines. The same way Black Lives Matter and the new Black Panther Party and all other groups are trying to get Black Americans to identify along racial lines. And it's working. Not all of them, but quite a few of them are starting to see it that way. This is not just the police. It's also, the standard Marxist mantra is that everything's about racism. That Western civilization itself is inherently racist and imperialistic and oppressive of people of color, and that capitalism is racist, etc. So they try to sell these people on the idea that the culture they live in, their own country, is just inherently racist, and that the only real solution is to destroy it. And that's why you see Black Lives Matter supporters, burning the flag and wiping their ass with the flag and crap like that. They're being taught that America is their enemy, their own country. And La Raza does the same thing among Hispanics. This is not really your country. Your real country is Aztlan or whatever, and Mexico is superior, and wave the Mexican flag instead of the U.S. flag. And it's working. They're increasingly getting more and more, whether they're legal or illegal immigrants, to just not assimilate and to identify as Mexican, not as Americans. And that's just not going to work. It's going to create more division. But that's part of that. So what I'm saying is that this is I predicted about 2 years ago. What I see is a perfect storm of wide open borders, massive influx we've seen of already of illegal aliens who are being taught not to assimilate, also a massive influx of Muslims who are also being taught not to assimilate, and a radicalization of American blacks once again, like almost like a reverse assimilation. Instead of telling them that, well, your real identity is not American. You grew up believing you're an American, but you're not really an American. You're an African. It's all about black power in Africa, and let's go ahead and carve out our new black nation here. So that's what they're doing. They're getting people to buy into this and start balkanizing and dividing along racial lines and along ideological lines. They want to split the American people up and divide and conquer. So that's why our focus in Oath Keepers is on the warrior class. And we've got black veterans and Oath Keepers. We got black cops. We got white cops. We got, current serving military of all colors. And we're just focused on the warrior class. And our goal is to try to do what we can to unite them and not buy into this divide and conquer between the people and the police and veterans and police and whites and blacks and Hispanics, but unite all of them together and say our bedrock is the Bill of Rights and the Constitution, but in particular the Bill of Rights. Let's defend that common ground and as Americans come together and try to work against this divide and conquer strategy. But it's hard. It's difficult. You see a lot of conservatives, back again to the cops. I can't tell you how many veterans I know that now pretty much just hate cops. They hate them. And it's tough to get them to see the strategy of, look, let's do our best to bring the police back into the fold of the Constitution. And the way to do that is to go and offer your support with them to protect your community together against Islamic terrorists or radical, Black Panther or Huey Newton Gun Club, whatever they are. Unite against the terrorists together and give the cops a chance to do the right thing, while you also give them the message of you must clean up your act. We have to make sure we give them a carrot and a stick. That's what we have to do. And going back to the militia, there's no way in hell you're going to revitalize the militia in your area and get your neighbors to sign on board and get all of the folks in the town together to defend your town if you're anti-cop. If you go around and say, I'm anti-police and I don't care if police are killed, and you're seen as anti-cop and anti-government, your neighbors are not going to listen to anything else you have to say when it comes to revitalizing the militia. They're not going to join your neighborhood watch. They won't join your town watch. They won't come to your training sessions because they'll see you as anti-cop. They're just not going to like that. So whether you like it or not, it's bad strategy to put yourself out there as anti-police. It's just plain stupid. So it's much smarter for you to say, I support constitutional cops. I don't support unconstitutional ones. If they violate the Constitution, they're on their own. But I'm going to give my local guys the benefit of the doubt and give them a chance to do the right thing. And I'm going to support them when they do that. And that also sends the cops the message that, hey, all I got to do is actually respect the Constitution. And all of these veterans around here and these gun owners will be with me, united with me. They'll protect me and my family. That's a win for me. All I got to do is tell the feds to go stuff it. I won't enforce their crap and be a constitutionalist, like Sheriff Clark, right? Really good example. Hardcore black sheriff, constitutionalist. A guy like that will have the support of every friggin' veteran in his community. They will all stand up with him physically and protect him if it comes down to it. That's the win for the cops, is do the right thing, be a real constitutional cop, and you'll be protected. Do the wrong thing, though, you're on your own. That needs to be our message.
Yeah. And I certainly appreciate, Stewart, you coming on here with us at the Leak Project. I would strongly recommend our listeners go to oathkeepers.org. I know you have multiple chapters and opportunities.
You asked about Joe Robertson, the guy in Montana. Jason Van Tatenhove, our media director, wrote that piece.
Oh, wonderful.
But I
okay.
agree, but I agree with what he said. It's an example of a horrendous abuse of power. And the judge in the sentencing hearing admitted that even the Supreme Court cannot agree on what it means to be U.S. waters. They cannot agree on a clear definition of what is and is not U.S. waters. And yet he went ahead and sentenced this guy to 18 months in prison, a 77-year-old veteran, for supposedly dumping dredge in U.S. waters when he couldn't even define it. The Supreme Court can't define it. So I think it's absolutely horrible. And really what's going on there is you got a radical environmentalist judge, Judge Malloy in Montana, is notorious. He will always side with the environmentalists, always side with the government against the landowners. And he's just a piece of crap, frankly. He's just a piece of crap who wants to put people in prison if they don't just bend the knee and bow down to the bureaucrats. So that's what he really said in sentencing. Is even though I can't define what is and is not U.S. waters, this guy should have just listened to whatever the bureaucrats told him to do, and he just was just being obstinate and not obeying orders from the bureaucrats. Is what it came right down to. So that's what he's being put in prison for, because he wouldn't just do what he's told by the local bureaucrat, who also can't define what is and is not U.S. waters. But once he speaks and says, go do something, you're supposed to just go do it. Otherwise, you deserve to go to prison. So I think Malloy is a friggin' traitor to the Constitution. I think he is, I think, on the top 10 of the worst judges in this country as far as being treasonous to the Constitution.
So what exactly happened then? I mean, I heard what you said, but he dumped some waste, a bucket of waste in a lake or something?
He widened a road, and when he widened the road, some groundwater gathered up on either side of the road, and he also had a bunch of stock ponds. He went ahead and created 2 new ponds. He had like 9 ponds on his property, but he was accused of he had like 9 ponds, and about 6 of them, I think it was, that they considered to be, in violation of their regulations. And some of them were on private property, but some of them were on an easement where he widened the road to make it easier to get in and out. They had a big fire truck that they used for fighting local wildland fires. So point is, though, was that the nearest creek was about 1.5 miles away, and yet they accused him of somehow dumping dredge, landfill soil in U.S. waters. Well, what U.S. waters? The pond? What? The groundwater that went underneath the ground? I mean, it's just, like I said, they can't even define what U.S. water means. What does that mean? No one knows. So you're just supposed to just do whatever the bureaucrat says. You're at risk. That's the bottom line. I don't really care about whether or not you want to consider what he did to be in violation of some stupid regulation. The point is, they can't even decide what the law is, and yet they're going to hammer this guy. It's just injustice. It's horrible. And this is the pattern across the West. This is where Ammon Bundy was right. I agree with him. They are definitely, obviously, trying to destroy land rights and property rights in the West, deny use of the land of the American people. That's a fact. My only beef with him was the chosen strategy of resistance. It should be local. It should be with popular local support. It should be on your own land. In other words, like Bundy Ranch. Bundy Ranch was a smart way to go, even though I thought it was, let's put it this way. Going and getting the cattle back like they did, I think that was obviously brinkmanship, but it worked. And it worked because the optics were so bad for the government, because they were seen as the aggressors. They had already lost the moral high ground in the eyes of a large percentage of our population, especially out west. Malheur obviously wasn't the case, right? So just bad strategy. Don't do stupid crap. And look, you don't get to occupy the government's land and its buildings until you've won the revolution. If you're going to have a conflict, you don't get to go and take over their buildings until you've won. This is not proper guerrilla strategy. The founders, I was going to go ahead and vent my spleen on this. The founders didn't stay on the ship and say, this ship now, when they dumped the tea in the harbor and did the Boston Tea Party, they dumped the tea and then took off, right? When they were disguised as Indians, dumped the tea, faded back into the population. That's called smart, okay? That's called guerrilla strategy. They didn't stay on the ship and declare it now the property of the people of Massachusetts, and there comes a Royal Navy, and you're like, we're going to stand right on this ship because this belongs to the people. That'd have been stupid, right? They weren't stupid. Ammon was friggin' stupid, all right? Sorry to say it, but he just is. Yes, he's brave, but man,
it didn't make any sense from the start.
If you're going to be stupid, you better be tough, because that was just dumb. The founders didn't go grab the customs house in Boston and seize it and say this now belongs to the people. No, what they did instead is they tarred and feathered the customs agent, right? And then they faded back into the population. They ransacked the governor's mansion. They didn't occupy his mansion and say it now belongs to the people and wait for the redcoats to show up. They went in and ransacked it and took off. The burning of the Gaspee the same damn way. They burned the damn ship, one of the ships used by the crown to try to catch smugglers. They burned the damn ship and then they left, They didn't stick around and say this ship now belongs to the people. That's just stupid. That's what Ammon did. This Mahler Wildlife Refuge now belongs to the people. We're going to go ahead and just hold on to it, and we're going to put up new fences and all kinds of stuff. And we're going to have a base of operations here for other folks to come here and then go out and do other cool patriot stuff. That's just completely nuts. Okay? It's just pie in the sky, unicorns and Skittles bull. It's just never going to fucking work.
It
Yet
is
you,
unicorns. You're right, man.
it is. It's just stupid. It's just you don't do that. You do that after you win. I mean, in Irish resistance history, they had a situation like that where they had the Easter Uprising, where they tried to they did the same thing. Took over a post office. I think it was in Dublin. Took over a post office and declared this post office, this British post office, is now the seat of the new Republican government. That lasted about 4 or 5 days, where they're all wiped out. You don't try to seize property and hold it from the government until you win. You can stand on your own ranch. That's different because now they're the aggressors. It's kind of like Lexington and Concord, right? The people of Lexington defended their town when it was attacked. That gave them the moral high ground and the perceived moral high ground and popular support in the area. They made the Redcoats come out where they were strong, where the Patriots were strong, and Gage was weak, where they had local popular support, where they actually outgunned the enemy. Here was kind of like trying to march into Boston and taking over the customs house. It's kind of the same kind of thing. Let's go seize some federal building in the middle of friggin' nowhere. Like I said, bad terrain also. If you're gonna play brinkmanship, if you're gonna choose a place to play brinkmanship, why not do it in a deep, rugged forest or a mountainous terrain, like Sugar Pine Mine in Oregon, or like Lincoln, Montana, for two examples of the places we were at. Mountainous, rugged terrain with deep vegetation, deep forest. Very, very different environment. Because you're always in a tactical situation, whether you want to believe it or not, or some guru tactical guy online wants to say over and over again, it's not a tactical situation. It is. You can't click your heels and go, oh, I'm not in a tactical situation. I'm not in a tactical situation. It's a tactical situation. Whenever you stick your thumb in Leviathan's eye, you're in a tactical situation as well as a strategic situation. And the moral high ground matters, but also the physical, tactical environment you're in matters. Whether they can easily drop the hammer on you or not matters. At Malheur, only a few roads in or out. They could only take one road pretty much to go to the meeting in John Day. Easy to set up what they did, a friggin' corner ambush basically to stop them. That's what they did. Easy. Made it easy for them.
Yeah, and also with the drone technology now, it would be, tactically, it'd be very difficult to do certain things. I mean, and like you said, it all kind of boils down to the thoughts of people's minds as far as with the internet age now. The internet's
Well,
great, but at the same time, it can be used against people as well because they can take one little scene and make it look like it's everywhere, like it's global to kind of
yeah,
condition
but
the
you also
masses.
have, the alternative media, like a Bundy Ranch. The mainstream media is going to smear us no matter what we did there, right? But people knew the truth. It was the BLM screwed up from the very beginning using attack dogs and trying to have free speech areas and all that kind of crap. They'd already lost the moral high ground. They're already perceived as the aggressors. They're perceived as violating what they were, violating the Constitution, violating free speech and assembly. So across the country, everybody on the Patriot side of the fence saw that as illegitimate and were sympathetic to the Bundy family. That's why guys came from all over the country. That's why we were there. We were there to be sure there was another wake up. We saw it building up. Like this is getting pretty bad. They're violating the First Amendment. They're bringing in, we knew they're bringing in military contractors. They had a guy who was ex-SF working for their guy on the ground there was a special forces veteran, unfortunately. So we knew they were coming in kind of heavy handed. And so we went there to make sure it didn't turn into another Waco slaughter. And a bunch of other folks from all over the country had the same mindset. Let's make sure it doesn't turn into another Waco. So they flooded there, and because of the response, because of the wide base of support, and because of the optics of the government being seen as illegitimate, they were over a barrel. Even though the terrain wasn't the best, it's pretty wide open desert. Politically, they were screwed because they had such support in the community and across the country that the government couldn't drop the hammer. So I mean, we were worried they would anyway. I don't trust any someone like Obama. I don't trust him. Hillary Clinton, in particular, if she gets in the presidency, don't count on it, guys. Don't count on her not dropping the hammer. Look at Waco. They dropped the hammer big time in the Branch Davidians. It was bad. So, but anyway, the point is that the public sympathy was on the side of the Bundys because they were on their own ranch, protecting their own right to cattle, and folks didn't buy the BLM's arguments that these cattle need to be confiscated. It didn't make any sense to us, and so that's why they were able to do what they did there. Malheur, totally different. Did not have the same kind of popular support for what they did. In fact, the only people that actually supported what they did were the ones that showed up there, which is a very small handful of people. Most of them, social outcasts and misfits, frankly, aside from Lavoie. But all these other folks out there that are like demonizing me and demonizing Oath Keepers because we pointed out this is a bad idea, well, they didn't go there either. None of them went there. I mean, name them. You can go find all the different folks out there that are bad mouthing us And were they there? Were they actually in the refuge with gun in hand? No, they weren't, because they knew it was stupid too. But they just want to use it as a way to beat up on us. But anyway, point is, it was stupid. If you're going to do something, use your head. Look to the founders' examples. They only stood their ground, like Captain Parker, when he was standing on his own village green, where he knew that if they started the fight there, the Redcoats would be the clear aggressors, and he had enough local support to actually prevail, which they did that day. He lost that immediate first firefight, but later on, his guys took part in the ass kicking of the Redcoats all the way back to Boston because they had enough popular support as a unified community. They were not a secret cell. They're not a handful of guys, and they weren't trying to take over some government building, right? They're on their own soil.
Makes a big difference. And maybe just another question before we close out tonight. As far as the Oath Keepers go, how many people are involved, and what's the next level for Oath Keepers?
Well, we have about 30,000 members, but I look at it like an iceberg. We've always done this. To me, like the active duty Oath Keeper cops and military, for example, they're the visible tip of a massive iceberg of guys that feel the same way. So you can't really look at it like, well, they only have 30,000 people. Yeah, but we're just a representation of what else is there under the surface that aren't official members. And that's what really matters. Frankly, you know, we need members to run the organization. We need the dues, but that's really not the point. The point is to get the warrior class of America to unite. So I tell the guys in Oath Keepers, your job in your community is not to go and try to get everybody in your VFW to come join Oath Keepers. That's stupid. They're already an organization called the VFW. They're already a unit. They've got a building, they've got officers, they've got money, they've got men. What are they doing with it is the real question. So what your real job as an Oath Keeper is to go and get them to see themselves as a unit and start taking responsibility for their community. Same goes for the churches. Same goes for any institutions in your community. Same goes for your neighbors. You're not trying to get them all to join Oath Keepers. You're trying to get them all to form a neighborhood watch as neighbors. That's what really counts. So that's why our CPT teams stand for community preparedness teams. They're not Oath Keeper preparedness teams. We're not some kind of like small prepper group for each other. Our goal is to be training cadre to turn around and get the entire town to establish a town watch, a sheriff's posse for the county, and eventually a town or county militia of everybody. It won't be the Oath Keepers militia. It'll be the town militia. Like here, it would be the town of the Eureka militia. So my goal, a personal goal right here, is to have a Eureka town watch, and that should be the goal of every Oath Keeper across the country. So the next step for us is to actively organize town defense forces. Right now, we're launching our Operation Backstop. We're going to pledge to go and back up the cops, our local cops, against the cop killers, and also unite with them to defend the community against terrorists. Well, part of that is going to be not just us backing the cops up directly, but also us veterans coming together and forming a town defense force. Whether the cops like it or not, we're going to do this. So my first step forward to them is going to be, we're here in Operation Backstop. We will back you up. If we see you pull over to get gas or something to eat, we'll pull over and overwatch you while you do it so you're not killed by some crazy cop killer. That's the first message to them, is we're here to help protect you. And we have a thing called Family Safe. We tell the police that if you have a threat against you or your family, we'll come protect your family. I think it's important too. So they know that if they're targeted, we are there. Unlike the feds are not going to be there to protect their family. The feds are not going to be there to overwatch them while they're getting a donut or coffee. We can, we will do that. And we'll tell them, and if you need our help, let's say there's a Beslin-style attack on a local school, we are here to help you for that too. We will come to your aid. A lot of these small towns don't even have a SWAT team. We will come do it. We're offering them our assistance. But then we will also, the next step after that is to say, at the same time, we are going to form neighborhood watches. And even if the police don't want us to do it, we're going to do it anyway because we have the right to do that. And we're going to form town watches because we see a massive attack like a Beslin-style attack on a school or a Mumbai-style attack. We see that coming. And now with the threat against churches, it could be to wipe out a church, wipe out a school, wipe out a shopping mall, or even wipe out an entire town. I mean, ISIS has done this in the Middle East, right? They'll go in and kill everybody in a town to terrorize people. And the Taliban did the same thing. So that's what we see coming. So we want to see Americans get off their butt and prepare for that eventuality. It's going to happen. So we'll do that. And the message is we're going to do that in our communities, whether or not the police want us to. We're not asking their permission. We're letting them know we're going to do it, and we're offering to work with them. Of course, we'll always try to coordinate. But if they've got this only one's attitude that we shouldn't be doing that kind of stuff, then tough luck. We're going to do it anyway. But at the same time, we're going to first approach them and say, we're here to back you up. Let's work together to secure this community. But so that, that is, I think, that's the next step for us, is to really push this unifying of the warrior class. That means your local gun owners, your local veterans, your local cops, both current, serving, and retired. Do your very best to bring them all together. These are your warrior class. Bring them together and then train everybody else to become a warrior too, whether they're prior service or not. Have them learn, teach them how to fight, teach them how to work together. Come together, unify as much as possible, and work with the local cops, give them a chance. If they then, it's kind of like Christianity, right? Jesus knocks on your door, and if you turn him away, then you just lost all your excuses, right? Same goes for the cops. We're going to give them a chance to repent their sins. If they've been doing things that are wrong, give them a chance to do things that are right now and do the right thing. If they then refuse to do that and refuse to help us in our communities, then we'll just do it without them. That's what we're going to do.
Well, I'll tell you, you have definitely brought an enormous amount of information. I certainly appreciate your passion towards freedom and liberties and people's right to have, the Constitution back them up and not be succumbed to this beast-like system or this Borg hive mind that just seems to assimilate so many people, whether they want to or not. It certainly seems to be kind of a balancing point. You're trying to keep balance there so we don't all get taken over, essentially.
Doing our best. I mean, we're doing our best. I got to be blunt and tell you that we're fast approaching our own Solzhenitsyn moment, or you can call it the Patrick Henry moment. It's like Patrick Henry said in his famous speech, give me liberty, give me death. He said, when will we be stronger? How much longer are we going to wait before we fight back, is basically what he said. And I think that's a good question for us. I do think that people have to start, be really serious about using strategy and trying to learn by the founder's example. But there does come a point where, I've had people write and say, well, when are you guys going to actually do anything? When are we going to stand up? And how much more are we going to take? And that's a really good question. All I can say is that we need to try to follow their example of making sure that when we do, if a fight's going to come, well, like Patrick Henry said, let it come. But let it be on the best terms as far as the moral high ground and the broadest support among the people. And also get ready. If you see a fight coming, get ready. The founders got ready. They formed militias. They took over the local town and county governments. They became strong locally, stored food. They stored equipment. They trained. They got ready so that when the fight came, they were in the best position possible. But there does come a point where you just have to fight. When Lexington Green happened, the guys, Captain Parker and his men, had no choice. They had to stand their ground. The fight had to start there. But they did it in a way where they forced the bad guys to be the aggressors, and they did it as a community. So that's my closing message: is get unified, stand your ground locally, so that you are perceived as being in the moral high ground. And it's not that we don't care what the media thinks; they're never going to be on our side. But your audience is the warrior class of America. In particular, what does the current serving military think about what you're doing? If you start a fight that they perceive as illegitimate, where you don't have the moral high ground, you're not going to have their support, and that's critical. You want to have a short, relatively bloodless victory, have the military be on your side. You want to have a long, horrible fight of desperation, have them be against you. So think about that. You can be angry all you want, but you still got to use your head. You still got to have strategy. Okay?
Absolutely. And folks, check out oathkeepers.org if you'd like to know more. Also go to leakproject.com, get access to exclusive content. Subscribe to youtube.com/clandestine Time Lord as well, and you'll get access to the latest podcasts absolutely free. This has just been an enormous amount of information, folks. And remember, with all of this said, if there's balance within whatever you do, that usually seems the best answer, right? There's so many people out there, and not regards to this in any way, shape, or form, but there's people out on the internet today that you read some of the comments they leave on certain podcasts and stuff, and you can tell their mind is so far to one side or the other. I've noticed many times there's a balancing act, and I'll tell you certainly have brought some good information to the table, and stay safe, man.
Well, I don't claim to have all the answers. And I was talking to one of our guys the other night, and I just said, look, I can tell you, hey, look, this is proper strategy. Here's bad strategy. Here's good strategy. But in the end, the fight's going to start. It's going to start. And when it does, it does. And it might not be under our ideal circumstances. But I just, in closing, I just want to tell you that look what they did. They waited until it was clearly about guns. When they came, they suffered all kinds of other abuses as they laid out in the Declaration of Independence. But when it came right down to it, the fight started over attempted gun confiscation. And that's what has the greatest buy-in in the population, even today. So I think that's something to think about. If you're going to have a fight, let it start over guns. All right. Well, thanks for having me on, man. Appreciate it.
Ladies and gentlemen, Rex Bear with Leak Project, I'd like to thank you very much for joining us this edition. I have a real treat for you tonight, folks. We have the founder and president of Oath Keepers with us, Stewart Rhodes. Now, he was born in Fresno, California, and comes from a family of hardworking migrant farm workers of Mexican and Apache Indian descent on his mother's side, and hardworking Midwest farmers, horsemen, and GM auto workers on his father's side. Now, both sides of his family have a long tradition of military service. During World War II, his grandfather on his mother's side was a B-17 ball turret belly gunner, and his grandfather on his father's side of the family served as an Army infantryman in the Battle of the Bulge. Nearly all of his uncles on both sides of the family served in the Army or Marine Corps during World War II, Korea, and Vietnam. His father also served as a Marine. Now, following the tradition, Stewart joined the Army straight out of high school at the age of 18, attending basic, AIT, and jump school at Fort Benning, Georgia, and then serving as a paratrooper, airborne infantry, stationed first at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, and then at Fort Lewis, Washington, where he served in a long-range airborne scout company for the 9th Infantry Division until disabled in a rough terrain parachuting accident during a night jump. After the Army, Stewart graduated from the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, summa cum laude, where his honor thesis focused on the political theory of James Madison. While attending UNLV, Stewart taught rape prevention and street crime survival as a volunteer instructor for the UNLV Jean Nidetick Women's Center. Probably said that wrong. He also worked as a professional sculptor and as a Nevada State certified concealed carry firearms instructor. After college, he worked on the Representative Ron Paul's staff. Now, Stewart also graduated from Yale Law School. How ironic is that, folks? Back in 2004, where his paper solving the puzzle of enemy combatant status won Yale's Judge William E. Miller's Prize for Best Paper on the Bill of Rights. He assisted teaching U.S. military history at Yale's History Department, was a Yale Research Scholar, and is now writing a book on the dangers of applying the laws of war to the American people. With partial support from a modest but gracious grant from Yale Law School, after law school, he clerked for the Arizona Supreme Court and then served as a small-town Montana criminal defense lawyer. He has served in a pro bono capacity on several gun rights cases before federal courts of appeal and the United States Supreme Court while practicing law in Montana. He's also served as a volunteer firefighter. So talk about a resume, folks. Now, here's what I find fascinating. If you look up Oath Keepers, like if you go to a specific search engine, type in Oath Keepers, you'll see Wikipedia will typically pop up shortly after oathkeepers.org. And if you click on what Wikipedia says, they really spin this organization, in my opinion. Now, let me just read to you what Wikipedia says. Oath Keepers is an American radical organization associated with the anti-government patriot movement. So if you're a patriot, then now you're anti-government. Thank you for spinning that on people. I really appreciate that. It encourages members, some of whom are current and former U.S. military and law enforcement officers, not to obey orders which they believe would violate the United States Constitution. The group is best known for its controversial presence in Ferguson, Missouri during protests and unrest in the city during which its members were armed with semi-automatic rifles. Oh no, head for the hills! And were described as a far-right militia group by the media. So that's pretty much all I'm going to read from Wikipedia here, but you can clearly tell whoever wrote that has a specific agenda. Is there something wrong with defending the Constitution from enemies, foreign and domestic? What's your opinion, ladies and gentlemen? Is there something wrong with that? Anyway, very fascinating stuff. I hope you enjoy the presentation. Make sure to go to leakproject.com if you want access to exclusive content. Subscribe to youtube.com/clandestine time lord. Also go check out our new YouTube channel, William Wallace. That's linked on our My Friends section on the YouTube homepage. Have a fantastic day, everybody, and be the change you want to see. This is Rex Bear. We'll talk to you soon. Well, Stewart, it's great to have you on the show here with us at the Leak Project. I know you're very busy. You got a lot going on. You get hundreds of invitations a week. So just very honored to speak with you. And how the heck are you?
Doing fine. Thank you for having me on. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. It's just great to finally speak with. I mean, you actually founded the Oath Keepers, and I've been trying to get in contact with you for quite some time. This is great. Now, if you would, for our audience, Stewart, tell us a little bit about yourself and why you decided to start the Oath Keepers.
I served as a paratrooper in the Army until I was disabled in a parachuting accident. And after that, I attended college at UNLV. I used to be a firearms instructor and a self-defense instructor. And I also then worked for Ron Paul in his DC office before I went to law school. I went to Yale Law School and graduated from Yale in 2004. After that, I moved to Montana and been here since 2005. And I also served as a volunteer firefighter here in Montana. That's my background. And I started Oath Keepers because I was part of the Ron Paul campaign in 2008. And then when I realized that Ron Paul was not going to win the Republican nomination, I knew we were in trouble. I considered John McCain an oath-breaking traitor, and I also considered, of course, Barack Obama and Hillary to be oath breakers too. Didn't really know back then who was going to be, when I made the decision, who was going to be the president, who was going to be the nominee for the Democrats. So I just realized that what we need to do is focus on the American warrior class. And I define that as the military, current serving and retired, us veterans as well, the police, the first responders like firefighters, EMTs, search and rescue, and also the gun owners in this country. I consider that the warrior class of this nation. And the reason to focus on them is that if we're running out of time, and we're going to have oath breakers, and we do, unfortunately, in both parties in power, entrenched in power, the only way to really counter their desire to destroy the Constitution, what's left of it, the only way to counter that is to focus on the guys with the guns. And that's both the guys that are current serving and retired. So that's our focus, is trying to unite the American warrior class and get them to understand the Constitution and make some decisions ahead of time about what they will and will not do. And of course, our responsibility as veterans goes beyond just saying we're not going to do things. We issued, the first thing out of the gate was we issued a declaration of 10 orders that a current serving Oath Keeper would not obey. And all they are is a mirror, basically, of the Bill of Rights, but adding in our experiences in the 20th century, the concentration camps, the internment of Japanese Americans, the application of laws of war to American citizens. We've seen this since 2001 in particular, right? So all of this stuff is why we said in our declaration of 10 orders we will not obey. And it's kind of weird. It's like the left never acknowledges that any of those things have ever happened in history or any of them are legitimate concerns. They always try to paint us as being conspiracy theorists, and yet I can point to almost every one of those planks and show where it's happened in history. So out of the gate, the goal was to focus on the current serving, but also the responsibility of the veterans has been there from the very beginning, and we're really focused on that now with our CPT project, which stands for Community Preparedness Teams. We're encouraging our veterans to go out and take a lead in their communities and get their communities ready for what's coming, and also work to revitalize that institution that the founders considered necessary for the security of a free state, and that's the militia. So we can talk about that as well.
Absolutely. And one thing that I wanted to bring up is I remember in 2009 when the media pushed the MIAC strategic report, the modern militia movement, and combined with just the way that the mainstream media spins somebody that's a part of a militia group, it seems as if in the movies, the TV shows, we all know that Hollywood's in bed with the Department of Defense, essentially. And the way that they project somebody that isn't a part of the establishment, they make them look like a back hills country boy that has an IQ of maybe about 85, that has some buck teeth and really a tough time understanding anything outside of, hey, it's time to, we better take our guns away. They just make them look like idiots.
Well, they'll go find that guy. That's what they always do, is they go find that guy and put him up. And here, let's not fool ourselves. I was around in the 90s, and when the first wave of the militia movement came up, and I can tell you that a lot of times they were their own worst enemies, PR-wise, because you had people who were never prior service, never even served in the military, had zero training, parading around, calling themselves general and colonel and crap like that. And I can tell you, as a veteran, all it did is piss me off. It pissed off a lot of the other veterans, and we didn't want to take part in a group run by a clown like that, some complete Walter Mitty wannabe. So that's kind of the problem, is that the militia movement in this country, in many ways, has cut its own throat and marginalized itself by the lack of standards and the kind of character that tends to want to rise to leadership. These are guys that, like I said, never served. And not that a guy who never served doesn't have a right to take part in his community. He certainly does. But don't parade around in colonel wings unless you've got a battalion underneath you. Or, if you're a captain, you should have at least a company size element. If it's just you and a dozen buddies, you're a friggin' squad leader. That's all you are. You don't deserve the title captain. It's just retarded. So I think the militia movement has a lot of problems that just come out of that lack of discipline. And also, frankly, a real militia would be everybody in the community. It's under the founders' ideal and their own actual practice. It was every able-bodied man in the community. So a good example is right up and lead up to Bunker Hill, or lead up to Lexington Concord. Actually, there's a really good book out called Bunker Hill about this lead up to the war, and in this book it describes how during the powder alarms that led to Lexington Concord, they were going back and forth. The colonists were going and grabbing powder out of the militia storage that they thought belonged to the militia, and of course the Crown thought it belonged to them, and so General Gage sent out his men to go seize the powder. So they're going back and forth like this, and there's a rumor at one time, about a month before Lexington Concord, that 4 militiamen had been killed by the Redcoats, and everybody turned out. About 15,000 militia turned out and flooded towards Boston under this rumor. Well, one guy was sitting in a tavern in a town when the alarm came up. He was a traveler, and he said that within 15 minutes, the hotel he was staying at, the lodge, was full of the men of the town. And then about 15 minutes later, they were all gone. The town was empty. It was him and the old shopkeeper, and that was the old lodge keeper, and that was it. The entire town was gone. They were gone, going towards Boston. That's an example of a real militia. It was every able-bodied man in the community, period. Most militia, so-called militias nowadays, it's Bubba and his dozen buddies, or they throw up some website. They claim to be the militia for the entire state, even though it's just, some guy in his underwear in his basement or in his house, and him and his friends. Well-intentioned, but unless you have everybody in your community on board, it's not really a militia. It's nothing. Okay, it's just paper tiger, and we've seen that over and over again in this country, unfortunately. So to me, unless it's every able-bodied person in the community, I don't think it deserves the title. It just doesn't deserve it. What you are at best is a select militia or a volunteer company or even a volunteer squad. Like I said, most of them are never beyond a squad size element. So I think the guys that are in the militia movement need to take a reality check about what they really are, and they're nowhere near the goal. They need to open themselves up to the community and work with the community and get as many folks on board as possible, so that they do actually represent at least all the able-bodied patriots in the community.
Absolutely.
So that's why in our efforts, we don't use the title militia for anything we do, because we don't think, like I said, we don't think it deserves it. Another issue that is a reality is that with a sheriff, for example, you have an elected sheriff who is elected by the people of the community. He's under the authority of the electorate, right? He's an elected officer. A sheriff has much more legitimacy in the eyes of the public out there than any group that just self-starts up and calls themselves the militia. In the historic reality in the towns of Massachusetts, you had the men pick their own officers. A guy who was a captain was the captain because all the men had picked him. And once again, it was all the men of the town. And so unless you have that broad participation and that broad authority in your town, you're not going to be seen as legitimate by your community. So I think the best way to go is to apply that label very selectively, only if you have some kind of official sanction, such as the town council establishing the militia and recognizing it, it's under their authority, and then they can let the guys pick their own leadership. I think that's fine. But short of that kind of town sanction, I don't think it should be called militia. So I know there's folks that'll disagree with that. And when crap happens, you got to just do what you can with what you have. But I think between now and where our goal is to have a real militia system again, and that would be under state statute, well organized, well trained and equipped, under the authority of the governor, and then with the full backing of the state legislature. That's the ideal. Is that going to happen? I don't think so. Okay, I don't think that's going to happen before the crap hits the fan. And this is where I might differ with Dr. Edwin Vieira, who really wants to see it done by state statute. I don't think that's ever going to happen realistically. So I think we have to just do the best we can. That's why I would go back to the county level or the town level. If I could get I live here in Eureka, Montana, if I can get my local town council to recognize the veterans and the gun owners who are training in this community, to recognize them as the militia for the town, I'll accept that. And I'll call that a militia. But if I don't have that kind of recognition from the town leadership, I'm not going to call it a militia, just because of the fact that I don't have that political cover anymore. And until I do, I think the word has been so demonized by the left, and like I said earlier, so unfortunately also demonized by the bad behavior of folks that use the title, I think that we have to just not use it until we have that sanction. So until then, call it a civil defense team, call it a volunteer town security team, call it whatever you want to call it, neighborhood watches, town watches. You can call them all kinds of things, but I wouldn't apply the word militia unless you have a sanction from the town.
Absolutely. And another thing that term reminds me of is I recently watched this reality series, or not the series, but just one episode, and I could even take the whole episode. I'll turn on the TV on occasion just to see what Hollywood media is doing to program the masses. It's kind of like a way for me to get their overall map of where they're trying to take and condition people. So I'm watching these preppers, these militia people, and most of them look like they weigh anywhere from 300 to